Hey Internet, it's part 4 of my Knights of the Frozen Throne card review. We are starting off with Priest, and the first card to look at is Shadow Ascendant, a 2 mana 2/2. At the end of your turn, give another random friendly minion +1/+1. Now, this is like a playable Shattered Sun Cleric, because with a Shattered Sun, it's a 3 mana 3/2, and you need a minion on the board in order to get the effect off, and it's a one-time effect where you get +1/+1. With this, you can develop the board on turn 2, and if you already have a minion, it gets buffed up. If you play a minion on turn 3, that gets buffed up on turn 3, which is the same thing as Shattered Sun does, but this way you get a 2/2 on the board a turn early, which I think is better than Shattered Sun, just because you can play it that one turn earlier. Next card, 2 mana, Spirit Lash. Lifesteal, deal 1 damage to all minions. I've used this once in Arena. It works out really well if your opponent is not expecting. I think I healed around 11 health off of it because my opponent was spamming cards. I decided to spam cards, and all of a sudden there's an 11-point health swing, and I clear his board. It's not necessarily a great card unless you combine it with Lifesteal. So if you have even, sorry, not lifesteal, spell damage. If you have even one spell damage on this, and your opponent has, say, 2 cards, or sorry, 4 minions on board, you got one on board, it's doing 2 damage to all the minions. All of a sudden, you healed for 10 health, you do 2 damage AoE to everything, and it only costs 2 mana plus whatever spell damage you need to get on the board. It's a pretty decent card, especially given that Priest can steal cards from other classes that allow it to become even better. And the next card, 3 mana 3/3, Acolyte of Agony. It has Lifesteal. This is a straightforward card. In a priest deck, this card seems awful because there are a lot of better ways for priests to heal themselves. I don't know why you would ever play this. Yeah, just I would not include this in your decks. There's simply better cards. Next card, 4 mana Eternal Servitude. Discover a friendly minion that died this game and summon this. This obviously has the best uses when you have very few minions in your deck and all of them are powerful. So the way I've seen this used is with the next card, 5 mana Devour Mind. Copy 3 cards in your opponent's deck and add them to your hand. That's not what I meant. I meant the 6 mana Shadow Essence. Summon a 5/5 copy of a random minion in your deck. So the way I've seen these cards used is you use the Shadow Essence. You summon a 5/5 Ragnaros. Personally, when I played against it, I was debating whether or not to devolve it to prevent whatever shenanigans, but I did not devolve it, so it died. Then Eternal Servitude was used, a Ragnaros was resummoned, and this just puts your opponent in a bad situation. So if you have a bunch of powerful minions in your deck, you can combo them with Eternal Servitude and Shadow Essence to get them out early and get them out continuously, especially if you have a deck that really supports this sort of thing. So that's a power combo you can use that doesn't necessarily have to be used on turn 10. You can set it up earlier and they just synergize really well with each other. So 5 mana Devour Mind, copy 3 cards in your opponent's deck and add them to your hand. That just seems like an awful card because, well, no, it's like Thought Steal, except maybe a little bit better. Thought Steal is very hit or miss. Devour Mind is very hit or miss because it depends on your opponent having good cards in their deck, and they probably will not synergize with your cards. There's an increasing amount of synergy in Hearthstone, meaning that getting just cards from your opponent's deck is increasingly bad because you want to have your own deck synergy, not relying on your opponent's deck synergy in order to win. So it's not a bad card. It's not a great card. It's a very get lucky and win card, or it's completely worthless. Embrace Darkness, 6 mana, choose an enemy minion at the start of your turn, gain control of it. So this is like Mind Control, except you play it, let's call it 3 turns early because it activates on turn 7. And the way I read this, it seems like it happens permanently. I've never seen this card used, first time seeing this card. But if this functions like Mind Control, where you get to play this on turn 6 and gain control of the card on turn 7 instead of turn 10, then that's just the better version of Mind Control that also allows you to not use up your entire turn. Because the thing about playing Mind Control is you're done. If you play this later on in the game, if you use it on turn 6, obviously that's your entire turn. You use it on turn 7, 8, 9, 10, you still have mana left over to do other things, so that inherently makes Embrace Darkness better than Mind Control in that respect. It makes it worse in that you have to wait a turn. So it's a very balance card, I think, because it's got a strong drawback in that your opponent still gets an extra turn with their card. But eventually you do get it, so it's I like the card. I think I'm going to use it a lot to mess with my opponents. Next, Obsidian Statue, 9 mana for a taunt, lifesteal, death rattle, destroy a random enemy minion. So just based on the death rattle, this is a good card because if your opponent has any minions on their side of the board, it's guaranteed to take it out. So it's guaranteed to be a 1-for-1. Now it's got lifesteal. If your opponent has to sack anything in this, now you heal up for 4 health. Again, there are better ways for priest to heal up, but 4-8 with taunt is decent enough. The problem with this is, of course, that it costs 9 mana. There are a lot of better 9 mana cards that you could be playing. But given its death rattle, this does make Obsidian Statue playable. I would not necessarily have more than one of them in your deck, though. Now, as for the Priest Legendary, Archbishop Benedictus. Battlecry, shuffle a copy of your opponent's deck into your deck. Obviously, this prevents you losing from fatigue, because you could just end up with well over 50 cards in your deck. But it's a 7 mana for 6, which is awful stats. Obviously, the minion itself is not going to be any sort of good. The minion is not likely to win you any games. But what it can do is do what Devour Mind and Thoughtsteal cannot, which is to copy all of your opponent's synergy. So if you play a card like this, obviously you're going to need a lot of card draw in your deck, because the only way you can take advantage of both the synergy in your deck and the synergy in your opponent's deck is by drawing an amazing amount of cards. So if your opponent's deck happens to have no card draw and you don't have any of your own in your hand, you have just completely destroyed yourself. Meaning that in order to get the most use out of this card, you have to make sure that your opponent's deck is worth stealing. Most of the time, it's probably not going to be, because by the time you get to turn 7, they're going to have played a lot of their synergy cards. And the thing I wonder about this is whether or not it copies your opponent's hand as well or not. If it does, that may be a lot better. If it does not, then this is suddenly a lot worse card. Obviously, you wouldn't know what's in your opponent's hand because it just goes in with all the other cards. But if it doesn't copy your opponent's hand as well, I think that's a pretty bad card. Next, the Shadow Reaper, and when this changes your hero to an 8 mana cost card, you get 5 armor as with all of them, and you destroy all minions with 5 attack or more. Now, the effect is good all by itself. An 8 mana card that destroys all strong minions and gives you 5 armor is by itself good, but it also gives you the new hero power. Void Form, hero power, deal 2 damage after you play a card, refresh this. Now, it's the first thing, deal 2 damage, that's not exciting, that's not interesting. Priest already has the ability to do that with a cheaper version. You can just turn yourself into a Shadow Priest, so that's not new. What is new is that it automatically refreshes itself, and if you happen to be comboing this with any ways to make your hero power cost less, or you have a lot of low mana cards, or maybe you stole somebody's deck that has a lot of low mana cards, all of a sudden you can do a whopping amount of damage. I don't think this gets buffed with spell damage, but if it does, then it's just that more powerful. It's certainly worth playing Shadow Reaper or Anduin if you are in dire straits. Obviously, the quicker you play it, the more value you get out of it, with, of course, the drawback being that you can no longer heal yourself. So this is certainly not broken. It's certainly not underpowered. It's probably going to get around a medium usage out of it, because dealing 2 damage every time you play a card is pretty usable. So next we move on to Rogue. The first card is Leeching Poison. Give your weapon lifesteal. I do not know why they would give this to Rogue. Rogues do not want lifesteal on their weapon. I know they have some survivability issues, but generally if they're going to be using their weapons, they want to be killing something. They're not doing it to heal themselves, and if they are healing themselves, there are other lifesteal methods they could use. So Leeching Poison seems like bad for me. It seems like a very bad option to have, because there are really no rogue weapon decks out there that you can use this with. Obviously, the most likely scenario would be to use it with a pirate deck that also combos off of weapons. That way you have that survivability and you can keep going face. Next, 3 mana Plague Scientist. It's a 2/3 with a combo, give a friendly minion poisons. the stats for it are pretty bad. Those are 2 mana stats, 2 mana card stats. But the combo is you give a friendly minion poisonous, which means that you suddenly become able to kill your opponent's largest minions as long as it does not have taunt. I don't actually know if poisonous works against immune minions. It probably does not because you have to damage them in order for immune to take effect. But Plague Sciences by itself, not very good. If you happen to have any low cost cards, which rogues play a lot of, then all of a sudden this card becomes pretty great. Next, 5 mana Bone Baron. It's a 5/5 with a Death Rattle summon 2/1/1 skeletons to your hand. If these summon them on the board, I would probably call this a good card. 5 mana 5/5 is just on the edge of playability. And if you play the 1/1s, obviously you can combo with the Plague Sciences, but it's not an overly good card. 2 mana, roll the bones. Draw a card. If it has Death Rattle, cast this again. So it doesn't necessarily draw a specific card, but does reward you for drawing a specific card. It, at worst, shuffles a card throughout your deck. It, at best, can draw multiple cards, but they didn't add that many Death Rattle cards for rogues, so if you're going to be playing a Death Rattle deck with, say, N'Zoth, this is going to be very good. If you play any of the other Death Rattle cards that you happen to have in your deck, if, for example, if you've drawn all your spells and you know that most of your cards are Death Rattle cards, then you can draw the majority of your deck off of a single 2 mana card. Even if you draw 2 cards off this, if you draw a single Death Rattle card off this, that's already better than Arcane Intellect. So it's a pretty good card. Shadow Blade, 3 mana, 3/2 weapon, Battle Cry, your hero is immune just this turn. So this is, I think, leagues better than Leeching Poison. The point of Leeching Poison is to increase rogue survivability when they're using weapons, and Shadow Blade takes that a step further by saying, well, I can't be damaged while I'm using this weapon. Therefore, I don't need the lifesteal, because you can look at it, you heal for 3 health, or you can prevent taking 6 damage or whatever it may be, whatever you're hitting just doesn't hurt you. So that's better than the lifesteal. Next, 4 mana 5/3, Runeforge Haunter. During your turn, your weapon doesn't lose durability. My god, man. That's really the only way Leeching Poison can be good. It seems as if they made the card Leeching Poison and they decided, this card is trash. No one's going to want to use this. So let's give them a reason to use it, because if the weapon has infinite lifesteal, then all of a sudden you can actually make some real use of that. If you have lifesteal the entire game off of your weapon without needing to play a new hero card, that's pretty good. But the Runeforge is pretty easy to kill. It does not forever make your weapon do that, so it's not a battle cry that makes your weapon not lose durability during your turn. And of course, the other counterpoint, instead of killing the card, is killing your opponent's weapon, and then it does lose durability unless they get a new weapon out. So next, 1 mana Doomerang. Throw your weapon at a minion. If it deals its damage, then return to your hand. This card it's as if they thought Headcrack wasn't seeing enough play, and rather than changing Headcrack, they decided, let's make another card like Headcrack that no one's really going to want to play. But this one is better because you can combo it. Doomerang is only going to be good in combo deck. It's going to be good in wild if you want to use it with the Auctioneer. But beyond that, it's not a very good card. Because one of the main things that makes it worse is that you can only throw it at a minion. If you could throw it at heroes, then you could combo it with spell damage cards. But beyond that, it's not overly good. Now, 5 mana, or 6 mana 5/5, on stats wise, that's kind of bad for a 6 mana card. Spectral Pillager. Combo. Deal damage equal to the number of other cards you've played this turn. And again, it says, I would imagine they made Spectral Pillager first, and then they thought, well, we need some sort of way to combo with this, so let's create Doomerang, or let's keep other cards that may, for example, draw a bunch of cards then you get the cards you need to combo, and then you can play Spectre or Pillager. And if you have Shadow Steps, you have all sorts of preparations, whatever it may be, and you can deal all sorts of damage. But you would probably want to lower this card's cost a little bit in order to get the most amount of value. If it costs 4 mana, it might be a lot better. At 6 mana, it seems hard to really deal a considerable amount of damage with the combo that it has. And now for the legendary 4 mana, 4/5. I never really see 4/5s in this game. I think there's one or two other cards that have those stats at this power level. So Lillian Voss, Battlecry. Replace spells in your hand with random spells from your opponent's class. Okay, that seems awful because what that implies is that all the spells in your deck are awful, which means you're very likely going to lose the majority of games. And now you potentially get a bunch of awful deck spells from your opponent's class, which means you're probably going to lose the majority of games. It's an interesting card. It has a lot of RNG, a lot of clown fiestas. Beyond the memeing, I don't think this card is very good. And for the hero power for Lyra the Haro, Battlecry gains stealth until your next turn. This is super powerful because it's immunity for your hero that your opponent cannot play around in any way. Even with something like Ice Block, where you become immune for a turn, you can play around that by giving your opponent cards that deal damage at the start of their turn, and that gets around their immunity. With this, you can make that happen as well, now that I think about it, but by gaining stealth until your next turn, it essentially functions like Time Warp, where you get an extra turn to set up your board and set up whatever it is you need to do with your new hero power, Death Shadow, passive hero power. During your turn, add a shadow reflection to your hand. And what this does is each time you play a card, transform this into a copy of it. So now you can combo all your combo cards an amazing amount of times if you happen to have built, say, 2 or 3 of these up. Now, if you have Eviscerates, you can all of a sudden do 16 damage, or sorry, 12 damage with Eviscerates if you have 2 of these, or 16 damage if you have 3 of these, and 1 Eviscerate in your hand, obviously. Then you do have to combo it, but it just allows you to use cards that may not be over good by themselves, but if you can play them 3-4 times over, all of a sudden you can get that same amazing effect a lot of times. So next we have Shaman, 2 mana, 2/2 Murloc, Burlock, Battlecry, freeze an enemy. One of the biggest problems with Murloc decks is dealing with big minions. If you lose board control, if you lose the early tempo, well, how do you come back? Burlock is how you come back. You freeze an enemy. I don't know why they made this specifically a Shaman card, because this seems like it'd be better as a neutral card, but I guess they just want to combo. They really want to push the Shaman meta, or the Shaman archetype within, or sorry, they want to push the Murloc archetype within Shaman. That's what I was trying to say. So they've also added Ice Fishing, which draws 2 Murlocs from your deck. They seem to have used the same cards, so obviously they're thinking about the same sort of thing. And again, I like cards that draw something specific from your deck because it really eliminates a lot of RNG, and it promotes smart play. Just by itself, 2 mana, draw 2 cards is already a good card. Again, it's on par with Arcane Intellect, but drawing specific cards makes it better than Arcane Intellect because you draw synergy. The drawback, I think the reason Blizzard included this with the way it is because the drawback is that Murloc cards may not be overly powerful. So say you draw 2 1-mana Murloc cards. That's not that good unless you have ways to buff them up. The next card, 3 mana, Drakari Defender. 2/8 with Taunt. We have seen this before. It's now in Wild only, but the 2/8 with Taunt already exists. Overload 3. So 3 mana is, I think, the most overload out of any card. The other card that does this 5 mana 7/8 with Taunt. And I don't really know what deck you would play this in. I haven't seen it used at all. And obviously the stats are the best you're going to get on 3 mana in terms of a Taunt. But The big problem with this is that, say you play this on turn 3. Now on turn 4 you have 1 mana. What do you do on 1 mana? You don't do anything. That's the end of your turn. If you play the 5 mana 7/8 with Overload 3, on turn 6 you still have 3 mana, you can play something. But if you play this on turn 3, you give up turn 4, and turn 4 is a lot more powerful for Shamans than turn 3 is, meaning that I I don't really see why you want to play this ever. That's too much overload for the card. Maybe if you made it like a 3/8 or a 2/9 or a 2/10, or it would have to be more powerful than this. Honestly, if you're going to play a 3 mana taunt, just play a 3 mana 1/5 ooze thing that gets +2 attack on your opponent's turn, the elemental. Next card, Icebreaker. Destroy any frozen minion damaged by this. I do not really know why they're pushing this in Shaman, because as I mentioned in one of my earlier videos, the frozen archetype is mostly pushed within mage decks. So as a Shaman, you're not going to have a lot of ways to freeze enemies, which is very likely why they added the other cards. They wanted to create some new synergies that can be used. So let's see all of these new synergies. 4 mana Avalanche. Freeze a minion and deal 3 damage to the adjacent ones. This is like Cone of Code. They essentially decided that we kind of want Shamans and mages to be able to play freeze decks. So we are going to create a Cone of Cold. We're going to give Shaman access to the cock in order to be able to combo with the Icebreaker, because otherwise this card is trash. So let's add another card that also combos with the Icebreaker, because otherwise this card is trash. This new card, Voodoo Hexer, taunt freeze any character damaged by this minion. This card is good because the point of taunt is to slow down your opponent's big minions or to slow down your opponent's damage. If you freeze them, you slow them down by an extra turn. So yes, it doesn't do a lot of damage, but just slowing it down makes this a good card, and I think it's just objectively better than Drukhari Defender. If you want to play taunt with these kind of stats, just play Voodoo Hexer. You know, it's just better. And the next card, Cryospace, give a minion +3/+3 and freeze it. So I like the dual choice you get out of this. It's like a druid card where you get a choice: either give a minion +3/+3 or freeze it. With obviously you'd freeze an opponent's minion or give your minion +3/+3. What this does is it allows you to give your own minion +3/+3, but your opponent gets an extra turn to react to that in order to try to make it work, in order to try to get rid of your minion. So you can obviously protect any sort of war leaders you may have with this card, because you don't really need to attack with that war leader. You just want to survive to keep your other Murlocs safe. But by freezing your turn, it's got a really powerful drawback. So I think it's a well-balanced card, and I plan on using it to try to make it work in my decks. Next, Snow Fury Giant, 11 mana, 8/8, costs 1 less for each mana crystal you've overloaded this game. I'm honestly surprised this card didn't exist before. It seems like such a natural card, because the other cards where it costs less if you cast a spell, it costs less if you have minions on board, it costs less based on the number of damage you take and number of cards in your hand. It seems like this card should have existed since the start of the game. I'm surprised they just got it in now. I'm going to see. I'm trying to think of how cheap you can make this and maybe how quickly you can play it out. So say you play 2 Overload on turn 2. Well, you can't play this on turn 3. Say you play this on turn 3. This goes down to 8. That would mean that on turn 5 you can play some Overload. And in Standard, you can't get rid of your overloaded crystals. So say you play 1 Overload on turn 4 or 5, then on turn 6 you would have 1 mana to work with, or sorry, 5 mana to work with, and this would cost 7 mana, which means on turn 7 you can play an 8/8, and beyond that you can get it cheaper, but it seems like the earliest you could probably get this out would be turn 7 or 8, which is okay, I guess. It's alright. And obviously, if you top deck this later in the game and cost 0 mana, then you're in good shape. But I don't think you can really play this earlier than turn 7 or so. And I think this is the cheapest hero you can get. Thrall Deathseer. Battlecry. Transform your minions into random ones that cost 2 more. Obviously, if you're playing this deck, you don't want to have 10 mana minions in your hand. Actually, I think, do they get transformed? Would they become giants if you do that, the 12 mana giant, or would they stay as the 10 mana card? I'm not entirely sure because when you involve 10 mana minions, they just stay as 10 mana minions. In any case, the new hero power is Transmute Spirit. You transform a friendly minion into a random one that costs one more. So you get this automatically, and you can keep doing this permanently each time you want to keep evolving a minion. So you can trade with the minion and then evolve it, so which heals it back up, and you get a hopefully more powerful minion. And given that you can play this on turn 5, it also makes it that if you play a bunch of crappy Murlocs, you run out of steam in your Murloc deck, all of a sudden you can pump your Murlocs up. You lose the synergy, but you get more powerful cards with these. So I think they're trying to push that synergy as well. And the Shaman Legendary is 6 mana, 4/4. These stats are awful. Let's see what it actually does. Whenever another minion is frozen, add a copy of it to your hand. Obviously, this synergizes with Cryostasis. They are trying to push the frozen archetype within Shaman. I imagine they'll probably add more frozen cards in the next expansion to try to push this further. But by itself, this is not a very good card. If you're gonna have this sort of archetype where you add a copy of a minion to your hand, there are more powerful ways to do this. Even like a Faceless seems like a better option than this. A Faceless for any of these cards, which costs 5 mana and gets you that card on the board, and you don't have to freeze a minion, seems like a better option than Murabi. So now we have the Warlock. First is Sanguine Reaver Battlecry. Destroy a friendly minion and gain +2/+2. It's a 1 mana 1/1, but obviously you're not going to be playing this on the first turn, so you may not even necessarily keep in your opening hand because you need to develop the board first before you play this. The most obvious ways to play it are with other cards of yours that spawn 1/1s, or any sort of ability to cards that have death rattles that spawn cards for you or that have effects that benefit you. You destroy that and you get this a 1 mana 3/3 on the board. That's decent enough. This will definitely see play. It's probably not broken because unlike other broken 1 mana cards in the past, it only has the effect happen once and you have to destroy one of your cards for it. Next, 2 mana Drain Soul, Lifesteal, do 2 damage to a minion. Has this card not already been in the game? I'm pretty sure this card was already in the game, wasn't it? This is not a new card. Lifesteal, deal 2 damage to a minion. Yeah. Okay, that's not a new card. Halfiend, 3 mana 3/6. Whenever this did Warlocks get one less card than everybody else? It's not a new card, man. What is that? Okay, it's interesting. 3 mana Halfiend, 3/6. Whenever this minion takes damage, discard a random card. So the archetype they're trying to push here is discard decks. By itself, this minion is not very good. If you play with decks that power up from discards, like for example with Bloodquin Lenethale, which is a 5 mana 1/6, has Lifesteal, has +1 attack for each card you've discarded this game, and this occurs regardless of whether or not you've played the card. It's not a battle cry, it's not an end of turn effect, it just keeps happening. So if you keep using Halfiend up until this point, this can easily become a 5 mana 5/6, which is the borderline of playableness. Beyond that point, it starts becoming good. And Defile, not an overly good card by itself, but if you're not playing around it, as I haven't been when I didn't realize this card existed, you deal 1 damage to all minions for 2 mana. If they die, you cast this again. That catches your opponents off guard if they're not paying attention, because they could easily have swarmed the board. They could have 7 minions on board. They could have whatever it is. And if they have one health minion and 1 2 health minion, all of a sudden you can kill all of their 3 health minions, which should have been untouchable with the 2 mana card, 2 mana AoE card. But now you've wiped their board with a single 2 mana card. So not broken by itself. It is broken if your opponent is not paying attention. Meaning that if you're playing against Warlock, always play around Defile. I think basically every Warlock deck is running it. It's simply a better version of Arcane Explosion. It's Another pure example of power creep. They decided, Arcane Explosion doesn't get used anymore. How do we make it used? Well, you create the file. That's how you do that. And the 3 mana Unwilling Sacrifice, a spell that choose a friendly minion, destroy it, and a random enemy minion. So they're pushing that destroy again. Say your Halfine is getting out of control, you're discarding cards you don't want. Well, now you destroy your Halfine. And if you're playing Sanguine Reveler, you're going to be playing cards that you want to destroy, which combos you with your Unwilling Sacrifice. Say you don't draw Sanguine, well, you draw Unwilling Sacrifice. Now you can destroy that card, and you get that combo, and you destroy an opponent's minion. So as long as you build the right deck for it, this is a pretty powerful card. Next, 5 mana for 5, the Despicable Dreadlord. With its stats, not that good. With its effect, this is an amazing card that I've seen played in every single Warlock deck I've played against this expansion. At the end of your turn, you deal 1 damage to all enemy minions. So this is like a Defile, or not necessarily Defile, it's an Arcane Explosion that occurs every turn. And it's only your enemy minions, so it doesn't hurt your minions. That makes this card an auto-include in every single Warlock deck. It's really good. 2 mana, Nosferatu. It's a 2/3 with Battlecry. Remove the top card of your opponent's deck. As some people have pointed out, I don't know why they mentioned top card. It could be any card at all. It has the same effect in terms of you remove a card from your opponent's deck. Chances are, though, that like with gimmicky burn decks, you're probably not going to get rid of something useful. You're probably just going to help your opponent get to useful cards faster, because a lot of the time I want to burn crappy cards so that I have a higher chance of drawing good cards. If you play this on turn 2, chances are you burn a crappy card and give your opponent a good chance to draw good cards. So not overly good. But just that's why you can play this. So 3 mana spell Treachery. Choose a friendly minion and give it to your opponent. I have not seen this played. Um, Maybe you want to use it with a Halfine, because your opponent, if they're not playing Warlock, cannot combo with this discard mechanics. So, for example, you give this to your opponent, you can make it so that they start, if they ever play this, they start discarding cards that they don't want to discard, and that can be like a trap right there. And you can also, if your opponent has 9 cards in hand, you give them this, and they burn a card, and they have a card they don't want, which is, I think, objectively better than Nosferatu, even though it costs 1 more mana. But overall, what this requires is that you have bad minions in your deck. Do you understand that? In order for Treachery to be good, your deck has to be bad, which makes Treachery kind of bad, because it requires a bad deck. So now the highest cost hero, Blood Reaver Gul'dan. Battlecry. Summon all friendly demons that died this game. So you have 2 of these. All of a sudden you can do 2 AoE damage to your opponent's minions every turn. You probably don't want to resummon the Halfine, but the way I've seen this played is you play Mal'Ganis, which is a 9 mana 9/7, makes your hero immune. It buffs. Does it buff up your other demons? I think it does. And yeah, if you play a lot of powerful demons, then this is a really good card. It's probably the best 10 mana card that exists in the game right now if you have the right deck for it. And then, of course, it's not just because of its battle cry, it's because of the new hero power you get. Siphon Soul, hero power, Lifesteal, deal 3 damage. By the time you get to turn 10, you're going to want to start healing up. You're probably not going to want to use your hero power to draw cards anymore. Meaning that if you can have that Lifesteal where you deal 3 damage, it really helps out with your survivability. This can really turn a game around. It's a very powerful card. If you have it, I really recommend training a deck around it where you have a lot of demons that function well with it. I'm surprised this is not a demon. I would have made this a demon, but I guess maybe it's just overpowered when you combine the two. I don't know why they wouldn't do that. And for the final archetype, Warrior. These are the final cards to come out of the new expansion. After this, the review will be done. So let's get into it. 1 mana, 1/3, Animated Berserker. After you play a minion, deal 1 damage to it. The biggest problem with any sort of enraged deck is that it can be difficult to enrage the minions. And they thought, you know, we need a way around that. We need some sort of mechanic in place that we probably should have had some from the very start that allows you to really take advantage of those enraged minions, because enraged decks are awful. I've made one as part of the quest, and they're just awful. With Animated Berserker, all of a sudden they're viable. They make your minions easier to kill, but even with something like Garrosh, not this Garrosh, the other Garrosh, or Grom, I don't know his name, the 8 mana 4/8 with charge that gets enraged. This can be used to combo with that. Say you've saved your coin. I think this is a better option than the other ways to enrage the minion, because A, it costs 1 mana, B, you get a 1/3 on the board, C, it happens every turn, so you can use it for all of your enraged minions if you want. It's good for the 2/6 with taunt that becomes a 5/5 if you enrage it. So I think we'll start seeing some enraged decks, but because charge can't be used to hit heroes, we're probably not going to see too many of them. So next is a spell, 2 mana, Forge of Souls. Draw 2 weapons from your deck. I've said this before with the other cards. I like card draw that lets you specifically draw things that synergize. So this card I like. Again, it's a better version of Arcane Intellect because you're drawing 2 cards for 2 mana instead of 3, and it's even better than that because you have synergy. But we've seen this card before, except with different archetypes. So next is a new weapon you can get. It 4 mana Blood Razor. It's a 2/2 weapon with Battlecry and Death Rattle. Deal 1 damage to all minions. So with its stats, it's not very good. With its Battlecry, you can potentially use it to wipe your opponent's board if you're getting Zerg down. And with the Death Rattle, you can do 3 damage to a minion, and that's the end of the weapon. It's not a really good though. It's not a very good weapon, I don't think. Next minion is a 3 mana 4/3. These stats are very much playable just by itself. Mountain Fire Armor. Death Rattle. If it's your opponent's turn, gain 6 armor. So again, this is another one of those cards where you and your opponent have to think about when you want to play this in order to maximize the chances of it getting killed on the proper turn. For you, it's your opponent's turn. For your opponent, it's during your turn. Next card is the Valkyr Soul Claimer. 3 mana 1/4. Whenever this minion survives damage, summon a 2/2 ghoul. This card obviously synergizes with all the other cards that come in your deck. So say you play an Animated Berserker on turn 2. You play this on turn 3. Well, now you just summoned a 3 mana 1/4 and a 2/2 on the board, which gives you 3/6 stats to work with. So you can get rid of 3 health minions, and once you do those, so this will be a 1/3, which will very likely heal, which will very likely summon another 2/2. So it has a lot of combo with the other cards that have come into play, and Warriors are already got things like Whirlwind to also combo with this. And if you really wanted to, you could also buff it up with other minions like Cruel Taskmaster, and this becomes a 3 mana 3/3 that summons a 2/2, and you have a 2/2 on the board, so you end up with 7/7 stats on turn 4. That's decent enough because you also have 2 mana left over. So I definitely see this getting some play. It's essentially like a Grim Patron, where everybody gets in here, except it's not just broken in that it is killable eventually. This will probably see some use with some heal decks, where you can heal this back up and keep getting those 2/2s. I would imagine that you'd also want to use this with buff decks, where you want to buff the 2/2s and just overwhelm your opponent like that. 5 mana Death Revenant. A 3/3 stats. These stats are awful by themselves. Battlecry, gain +1/+1 for each damage minion. So once again, it seems as if Warrior has the most amount of synergy out of any of the other classes that have come out. This synergizes with basically all the other cards that come out. And so if you have at least 2 damage minions, this becomes a 5 mana 5/5. That's the borderline of playability, which means you would have to have 3 minions on board in order to be really good. If you top deck this and you don't have any minions, then this is just an awful card. I think the drawbacks of this make it not really playable, because if you're going to play a 5 mana card, you're going to want to have better options than that. You may even want to play um, the 5 mana 4/4 that gives +1/+1 for each minion. Because think about it, if you've got 3 damage minions on board to get a 6/6, then you can get a 7/7 if you play the other 5 mana card that gets +1/+1 for each minion you've got on board. So it just seems like a worse version of that, which means that if you want to play this card, play the other card. 2 mana spell, Bring It On. Gain 10 armor. So just based on that, it's worth its weight, because in this game, 1 mana gets you 5 armor, 2 mana gets you 10 armor, so it's already worth it to have this. Instead of having 2 1 mana cards, you can have 1 2 mana cards that has the same effect. And it reduces the cost of minions in your opponent's hand by 2. That in turn makes it not worth it, because you do not know what types of minions your opponent has, unless you've given them minions yourself, which I don't think you can do with this deck. Meaning that you would never, ever, 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 ever want to play this on turn 2, or keep this in your opening hand, because you do not want to reduce the cost of all of your opponent's minions by 2, unless you can be sure that they have no minions or no good minions that this card would really affect. You only ever want to use this if you're about to die. Otherwise, it's not a good card. So the next spell to get is 2 mana, Dead Man's Hand. Shuffle a copy of your hand into your deck. Again, I like cards that have randomness in the sense that they affect your card draw, but they have controllability in the sense that you control what cards are drawn. And what you do with this is you control exactly what cards are shuffled into your deck, and therefore you increase the probability of drawing cards that you want. I like this card, but it kind of promotes the control warrior archetype, which I don't think we're going to see, which means I don't think we're going to see this card that much. As for the warrior legendary, 8 mana, 4/6. The stats are really bad for an 8 mana card, so let's see what the effect is. Whenever this minion survives damage, summon a random legendary minion. Once again, it combos with basically every other card. So you deal damage to it. These cards combo off damaged minions. And I don't like the summoning a random legendary minion. I like it if, like, for example, it summoned an enraged minion, or it summoned a dragon, or summoned something specific that you could more easily control. If it wasn't a random legendary minion, I would say this is a good card. But with the way it's written, or for example, it said if it summoned one of 5 legendary minions that we choose, like maybe summon Ysera, or summon uh, Gramash, or whatever it may be. But just because it's any random minion, I don't like cards of this nature. I don't like that level of RNG. But I would imagine this is going to see a lot of play, because there are a lot of ways to trigger it, and it can be triggered multiple times. As you're doing damage, mind you, you can be doing damage to your opponent's minions and triggering this card. So now for the hero. The new hero is Scourgegord Garrosh. Battlecry. Equip a 4/3 Shadowmourne that also damages adjacent minions. You also get 5 armor. And the Shadowmourne is an 8 mana 4/3 weapon, which also damages the minions next to whomever your hero attacks. Seeing this come up against you is very scary. I've seen this card, and it instantly makes you completely rethink what cards you're going to play, because if you happen to not place your minions right, or you play the wrong minions, now your opponent can take a relatively small amount of damage and kill 3 minions. Rather than taking damage from all the minions, they take damage from one of the minions and kill all of them if you're not careful. So I like this. It makes both players think more strategically. So it's a well-designed card, I think. It's certainly not broken. You have Bladestorm, the new hero power, deal 1 damage to all minions. Obviously, this combos with all of your new minion damage cards. It combos with enraged cards, but enraged decks are not overly good, so you're probably going to mostly use this to kill your opponent's minions, not really to trigger your minions. And that's the end of my review. The next video I will be doing is opening my first 10 card packs of the new expansion. I have not done that yet, which means I have not received my free legendary yet. I have not done any of the play testing. I've done any solo missions, so I'm going to have to do all of this as part of the next video. For now, thanks for watching, and subscribe for more videos.